So good afternoon, everybody. This is our very first webinar on this topic, so a very warm and big welcome to all of you. And this topic which we will be discussing today is a very interesting theme, we thought. It's debunking the myths of high code and low code, the debate. So we hope that this webinar will provide us today with a platform where we can all learn from and develop a common understanding of the opportunities for the current and the future exponential technologies and organizations. So those of you who don't know me, my name is Liesel van Rooyen. And Paul, I know we only see each other every second or third here, but I'm still Liesel.
Hi, Liesel.
Good. So our panel consists today of a variety of experts, and I will give them the opportunity to introduce themselves in a moment. And they will also then, at that point in time, just set the scene for the discussion in terms of what their expectations are for today's debate. So we will be, now this is stuck. We will be recording this webinar as well, as Craig has already indicated, and we will be sharing the recording on Craig's Facebook page and then also on social media at #HighLowCode. If you can't find it there, please contact us and then we can send you the recording as well via a chosen media of your own. Now, we would really like to hear your voice as well, and please do participate in this webinar. I will be asking our panel a variety of questions today. And if you have a question or require any further elaboration on that, please do not hesitate to use your Zoom group chat and then to pose your questions or comments here. So please do participate. We would like to hear from everybody that's participating in the webinar. So we need to get stuck in the content, but before we get there, I would like to introduce our panel, and we'll start at the top of the list there, which is you, Bruce. Would you like to share with us what your expectations are of this webinar and what you would like to get out of the discussion?
Yeah, thanks very much. Hopefully you can all hear me clearly. So I'm the head of information science at the University of Stellenbosch. I've also got a couple of other hats at the university where we have a newly formed School for Data Science and Computational Thinking. But I actually also come from, let's say, an old-fashioned software engineering background originally. And for me, the transformation over the last couple of years to how we teach and make use of low code at the university level, but also what I've seen in industry has been exciting. So for me, the exciting thing then today is to see the contrast of inputs and opinions and hear from people also maybe with experience on the educational side, but also the practical real life side of things.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Bruce, and welcome to you.
Thanks.
Paul?
Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks very much for including me in this. I have about 18 or so years of management consulting experience. Prior to that, I've been the principal officer of medical schemes, I've run administration companies, I've worked in manufacturing. And so bringing the business sort of voice to this discussion, I'm very keen to see how the discussion goes towards low code and so on, because there are many problems that I've found in all industries, and it's the same problem over and over. They're the same problems over and over again, and you know, whether it be service or manufacturing, and at the rub of it all is what's actually running the business. Is it the business, the management of the business, or is it what IT can do? And then a lot of the problems that sort of stem from that. So I'm very keen to see how the discussion sort of revolves around that issue.
All right. Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul, and welcome to you as well. David?
Hi, I'm David. I've got about 20 years of experience in industry, all the way from ERP systems into building financial systems. So I've been on both sides. I've been on the high code end and I've been on the low end as well. So the concept of low code is obviously not a new concept. In the 90s, we had things like the 4GLs, and they kind of died when the internet was born. because the complexity was a bit much. And then these low-code tools started coming out again, like all the vendors started pushing out things like TIBCO with the BusinessWorks and VPN solutions. Oracle had their tools as well. Obviously, I spent a large time of building software the hard way using Java. Then I kind of moved back into the low-code environments, like with the TIBCO stack. I built various businesses from startup, so I've got an interest in trying to get things done very quickly. I think there's been a lot of advances in different areas. So low code is not obviously the solution for everything, but it is a solution for certain things, and especially in things like entrepreneurship, where you need to build a system pretty quick. You don't have massive budgets. Yeah, so that's kind of my perspective. So I think what's important for me is where we are at in terms of low code. What's possible, what's not possible, and I've used quite a number of different environments, and I can share those at a later stage. But my specific interest is trying to push the limits of low code as much as possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. Craig.
Thanks, David. That's awesome. And and I think for me, what we've seen is that actually very few customers are pushing the limits of low code. The tendency is towards a very conservative approach. And what we really find is that it's more about the people and the mindset and the practices than the limits of low code, and even with high code. If you don't get the people and practices and mindset right, you typically don't get the outcome right. So really for me, it's about enabling the outcome for speed, for smaller teams, for adaptability, for being more nimble and approachable, and delivering faster and more effectively. So yeah, let's see where we go with that. I think we've seen quite a few examples of things that work and things that don't work. So let's explore that today.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Greg, and welcome to you as well. And Charles.
Sure. So by way of introduction, at a very high level, I spent the first 10 years of my life as a software engineer, team lead, architect, kind of predominantly in the Microsoft enterprise space. So a lot of experience with lines of code and the power and what they can do. And then spent about 7 subsequent years to that in the management consulting space. So seeing the business perspective and actually figuring out why we try and build all of these things. And then I've spent the last better part of 5 years, 4 and a bit years in the low code space and really exploring how these two come together. So that's my background. In terms of the expectations for today, I think as a primary outcome, if we can just I know, like we've used the word, debunk the myths, dispel the rumors, and get ourselves all onto an equal playing field in terms of understanding what we're talking about when we talk about high code and low code and all these things. I think that would be a great starting point for us as a community of people trying to change the world through technology to be able to move forward in a smart way and do the right things.
Good. Thank you very much, Charles. Last but not least, Thabo.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Thabo Sbego. And in terms of introduction, I spent mainly the first part of my career in enterprise software delivery. So delivering solutions like CRM, HR management, workflow management, all of that type of thing. And then eventually moved into data analytics or business intelligence specifically is what we usually have referred to then. And what I got frustrated by is that in a lot of cases in BI, we would be working with data that we had to represent to businesses for decision making that was based on data that was inaccurate in a lot of cases, or data that needed to be worked on a lot. And I started trying to focus on, well, why was the data so incorrect? Why is it usually wrong? What's wrong with the source systems that the data comes from? And basically finding that it was because most of the systems were very inflexible and not supporting what the business users wanted from the systems, that business users then had to bypass the systems had to replicate some of the data in the systems, which led to a mess in terms of data governance. And that obviously affected business solutions. So that was my path towards finding a better way of building enterprise solutions that did support the business and business users that would then help the business, right, in terms of performance management. And in terms of what I do now, really, I spend a lot of time in solution architecture in the low-code space. So basically, showcasing examples of how low-code can be used to solve business problems. And what would I be interested in finding out in this session today is I know my viewpoint in terms of what I think low-code can do, what its importance is from a role point of view in the enterprise. I'm very interested in finding out what other people think, or what use cases they see for it, and so forth, and as well as helping, if I may, to debunk some of the myths.
Great, thank you very much, Thabo, and welcome to all of our panel members. Bruce, did you manage to rejoin again?
Indeed, I'm back again.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So now it's time to dive into the content of the webinar, which is debunking the myths of high code and low code, the debate, where myths is the opposing party. We will spend the next 40 minutes where I will be asking our panel a variety of questions around myths on low code and high code. And I also think it's very important that we get a little bit of a business perspective as well on both the place for low code and high code in organizations today. So, as we know, programming languages, and I think some of us may have been around back then, but not necessarily, existed over 200 years ago. So the evolution of programming languages stretches as far back as Babylon, if you didn't know, where a thing called cuneiform writing was used on clay tablets, to today, where we find ourselves in the fourth industrial revolution, where the high code versus low code debate is raging, and it's underpinned by many myths. So as our panel members have indicated, let's attempt to address some of these myths during this discussion, and let's try and see how much we can do to get through that during the next 40 minutes. So I'm going to start with a question on low code. Craig, you waving, hands up?
Yeah, sorry, can I just say before we start, if there's anybody else that would like to introduce themselves and just say why they would like to, or what they'd like to get out of this, please feel free to do that. Just put up your hand quickly.
So Craig, if you can help me just see everybody, you might have a better view because I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah, no, I don't see anybody doing that, so that's cool. Cool. Now, I just wanted to give that opportunity. So then go for it, Liesl.
No, thank you very much for that. So let's start with a question on low code. While the term is just a few years old, now a few years mean maybe a decade or so, low code development adoption has exploded recently. Forrester estimates like that the total market of low code development platforms will grow to an amount of $15.5 billion. By next year, 2020. Now, Charles, with this said, many believe that low code is only for small scale development. It's a good tool for simple apps, people say. So, and that it is not suitable for scalable, mission critical apps or even enterprise solutions. Now, is this myth people have about low code true?
Good. So I'm glad you gave some context to what simple apps mean. So I guess I would start there by going, well, what do we mean by something being a complex app? And also, so something there as well, apps, what we mean by apps, we don't just mean mobile applications, we mean solutions, systems, being able to solve problems. Something that makes a technology solution like that not simple are things like scalability, high reliability, integration, the ability to orchestrate across a high number of processes and systems and users. So putting in that context of can low code do more than just simple apps, I'd say looking at the platforms nowadays, if you had to go and look at the major competitors out there, that's been a massive focus for them. The ability to not only address that from a full stack development perspective, being able to build out complex logic, business logic, integrate with multiple data sources and data entities, build out complex user flows across different channels, whether it's web or mobile. but then also being able to run all of the heavy load, the high reliability, the infrastructure management, and the full lifecycle management that you need to think about in terms of what it takes to make an application in the modern world really enterprise and really large. Then absolutely, we've got tons of examples. When I say we as an ecosystem, as people that are practitioners in this space, are really seeing where low code is being able to do this. And I think we'll probably go into it further along. I don't want to stretch out the answer too long, but because high code and low code and all of these things are all really along, good low code should be a natural movement forward, standing on the shoulder of giants, you know? So high code is really the foundation for a lot of this stuff, and low code is the next evolution on top of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I see Craig is posing a question to everybody on the community. If you would like to respond on the Zoom group chat. So when do we need high code? But please respond on that on our chat. So Bruce, I would like to come to you now. With that said, we all know that one of the big challenges we sit with in organizations is the build up and the backlog of projects, and that projects, IT departments cannot keep up with the high need from business, and business requirements are not necessarily met timelessly. So my question to you, Bruce, is can high code frameworks outperform the programming of business requirements? Is that possible?
Yeah, actually, so this is an interesting puzzle piece, and in fact, one that I'm familiar with in terms of original, let's say, high code or old style coding that I've been involved with personally. And to me, it's actually quite clear that low code is the way to go to actually accelerate this, get this done in a reasonable time frame. From an education perspective and a research perspective, I can tell you these things are, I would even say obvious, in the sense that the abstraction level is more appropriate. You're no longer dealing with one kind of person that's able to process business requirements and business requirements engineering, and then translating that to another kind of person who's able to churn out volumes of code. So the fusion of these two skill sets is crucially important for actually building what needs to be built, and of course doing it in a reasonable time frame. On the education side, the reason I mention that as well is this is precisely what works increasingly at the university. You know, we don't need to just have everyone graduating as a computer scientist or as a computer engineer. There's an entirely different breed of person who can interact with the business side of things and should be more deeply involved in the production of the solution in the end.
So possibly what I'm hearing you saying is that we should look beyond high code and low code. We should look at the change of the different resources that we need, and that business and IT should be talking more often, and that could become more of a requirement to make either low code or high code successful in organizations, or combination thereof.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you took the words out of my mouth, but very much agreed on that. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Now, Craig, with what's been said so far on low code and high code, and with some of the statements made during the introduction, I think we can all agree that software drives the world. There is no doubt that software, therefore, is the oil that makes an organization run. So shouldn't this oil be of the best quality possible? And what is the secret to that quality?
Sure, Liesl, that must be the toughest question on the list. I don't think there's a silver bullet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are a number of factors, and I think the secret is you need to understand when you need and why you need high code when you need it, and I was hoping that maybe David would pick up on, when and why do you need high code, under what conditions, for what reasons, and why is that still important. But from my perspective, the secret to get the oil to be the right viscosity, if I can use that metaphor, is the right mix of skills, and it's, you know, so it's the right focus on the business outcome, the right combination of business and technical skills, where, you know, tech savvy leadership, so business people becoming more tech savvy. It's a combination of things, and it's not actually a high code versus low code thing as much as it is a mindset and practices and approach thing. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
I think David, please.
So my previous company, we built custom software, and I would say that, and we built it in C#. Now it was very custom front end, custom back end, extremely high throughput. And if I look back and I try to see, can this be done in something like low code? I would probably say that 60% could be done in low code, and the rest would probably need to still be done in the low code. Now, most businesses are not as complex or require complex custom built systems from scratch. Most businesses require things that manage workflow. They've got simple workflow. They need a mobile input or mobile platform, and they need a web, and they need to integrate all these things. So it all depends, I think, in terms of your use case. If you're really developing very custom specific applications, again, it's I've done a lot of work in things like machine learning. Like for instance, Microsoft's got the Azure machine learning platform. I'm not sure if anyone's used that. It's also a visual environment, but it's limited, so it's not quite there yet, but it's getting there. So I think the question of when, it becomes quite obvious. You obviously need to understand the platform that you're using. And when you're talking low platform, we're not just talking something like our systems. I think there's various different tools out there. Specifically, I think on the reporting side, you got now brilliant analytics tools where you probably want to use those low-code reporting tools, if I can put it that way. So I think where you really need hardcore Java guys or C# guys is, and obviously the corporate world is still full of this kind of, how can I say, paradigm. And they come from the 2000s, and it's difficult for them to change. Very, very difficult. But most of these companies have created SOA architectures, which is actually quite good in terms of trying to introduce something like a low-code platform. Low-code platforms are extremely good for channel management, but also in terms of where I'm at the moment, in probably the last 10 years, is in startups, where you really can't have lots of people. You can't afford lots of people. You don't have lots of time, and you need to get your product out pretty quick. And using different channels, mobile as well as web. I think, yeah, low code is perfect for that. Like I said, I've been a Java developer for 10 years, but I've always tried to move into the low code space, not because I'm lazy, but because the problem is when you're doing high code, you're kind of stuck in the world of technical issues. You're not actually solving business issues. And so a lot of the work that high coders do is actually, I would almost say, it's really solving technical issues as opposed to business issues. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much the case in my experience as well, David. I mean, where we've seen where you absolutely have to have high code is in cases where, you know, you need to wrap some interface like an RS-232 interface to a Weybridge, or, you know, some environment where there is no way to talk to the hardware, for example, other than to wrap some code around it so that you can use it in a low code environment subsequently. You know, so a unique scanner or a unique Weybridge interface, or, you know, a unique interface to, I mean, when you're building a robot and you build that bottom up, maybe Bruce, you can elaborate a bit on those kind of environments where there's no choice but to start with high code, but at some point you can provide an API or an interface so that you can focus on the business challenge that you're trying to solve.
Bruce?
Yeah, there again, I think you also hit the nail on the head. I mean, having the kinds of people who are specialized in getting those fundamental building blocks built, things wrapped up, device drivers in the case of something involving robotics or embedded systems. The great news is that kind of stuff is very often also a one-off. There may be some amount of open source, but once that's done and out of your hair, it's time to move on to solving things that actually create higher value rather than fiddling around with some amount of C, C++, Java, C#, and so on in great detail. And programming languages have a long history of helping us up that abstraction level towards where the business problems really lie. And domain-specific languages have a history of that as well. So I see this as being the natural progression in this.
So I think that in conclusion on what you have said here is that one must find what is the place for low code, what is there a place for high code, and then can those two marry and work together, subject to the solution that you need to put in place. Now, Thabo, with that said, many assume that if they start using any low-code platform, that they'll get locked in. Will they get locked in? And then also, does that make low-code more riskier than high-code?
Okay, to answer that question, we have to, there's always a thing of, it depends on what you are using. So Shaw mentioned the talk of a platform. So the very best ways that we know of implementing solutions in low code is using the best platforms in low code. So if people can look at analyst reports and so forth, you'll see who the leaders are. And most of the leaders have a platform approach to what they provide for people who are building solutions in low code. And a lot of them, the very good ones, support very standard languages, very standard frameworks for extending those platforms. So in terms of what you need to add on to those platforms for features that might not be built in, those will be done in standard technologies, meaning you are not locked in from that point of view, from an extensibility point of view. But then not only that, they also compile in terms of what they will run on, they also compile to standard language or standard frameworks. So those standard frameworks are available in many ways of deployment. So whether they're cloud-based, based locally and so forth, meaning whatever you've built in low code, if it's then deployed onto standard frameworks, you can continue to use that or develop further on it, even if you change the vendor that you're using from a low code point of view, or do not have a low code vendor at all at that point, right? Because they always support the standard features. But then that's very important. That's why it makes it very important that you are very careful about what low code platform you are using, because there are ones that have some runtime, some proprietary runtime engines that they use. Those would be much more difficult to get out of, and others that are open, right? So it's very important which tool you're using and which platform that you decide to choose here.
Oh, thank you very much for that. Thabo, yes.
Can I just comment? So yes. The misnomer that high code environments don't lock you in, I mean, it's, if you're using, for instance, an Oracle database, to move over to SQL is quite a mission. And vice versa. The same with Java. If you've got to take a Java framework and you've got to move it to something else, it will also require massive effort. I think with low code, at least you've got the design. Because everything is visual, you actually have the design of the system. So it's actually an easier migration process. We, for instance, in my previous company, bought into Silverlight, which obviously died a few years back. But that required quite a massive, undertaking to actually convert from Silverlight into HTML5. And so this whole thing about high code not locking you in is actually wrong. Everything locks you in at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's really just degrees of lock-in depending on the approach you've taken. I think the key thing is the point that Thabo touched on is really understanding the architecture that you're buying into, because that architecture is what sets the scene for your extensibility, your adaptability, and the extent to which you can move, and shift. And I mean, I want to make the point here that, from a platform point of view, if you've got the best R&D in the world investigating, as an example, should your mobile solution that you deploy out of the platform use Angular versus React, you've got resources that you would never get inside an average organization or inside even the best corporates. So that platform ongoing R&D and ongoing development in terms of what's the best way forward, how do you future-proof your architecture so that you actually aren't locked in, to me is where the value lies. Sorry, I don't mean to hog this discussion.
No. Great. You're touching on a few valid points, and I would like to come back to some of the key points made on both high code and low code, especially if we look at future and current exponential technologies. But Paul made a very interesting comment on our group chat where he said, well, IT may be the oil of commerce. Commerce validates the existence of IT. So, Paul, I have a question for you, which touches on the point that you are making then. So dealing with software development is often, very often, unfortunately, still challenging for both business and the development team. And there is a common belief that software development is complex and that huge budgets are required with similar sized projects and development teams. So why, with all of this said now, and also why does this still exist in this digital world we find ourselves?
Okay, so I suppose, gosh, I think what I understand from that is, we're dealing with complexity, aren't we?
Yes, yeah.
And to pick up from Craig's point there, the real challenge is not to create us a position for ourselves in a nice sharp corner, and how do we avoid that in this complex environment, right?
Yes.
And, it's one of the points that I wrote down here in preparation for this, and that, we have all this, where does this complexity come from? And all of it, what it does is it impacts management of a business, and management are the key decision makers, and whether it's an efficient organization or an inefficient organization, will depend on whether or not management is the bottleneck or if they're just capable, whatever it is. The challenge that we have to try and address from a business perspective there is, okay, certainly commerce validates the existence of IT, because IT is the key tool that we use to do the repetitive tasks over and over again, but also to help us deal with the more complex issues that we can't deal with in a off-the-cuff decision-making process, right? And my point is, management has to be evolved in the same way that, you talked about robots just now. You have to use sort of the high code for robotics. In a way, management is like a robot in the business because they're doing things over and over again, right? And it's the more they do and the more they're exposed to things, the more they realize they have to learn and they want to develop. So it's not just a question of IT having to come in and support a business as it is at a given point in time, or a product suite, or a process, or whatever it might be. There's also that human complexity of the capability of management that needs to be supported and guided through that process. And I think this is where they're the ones deciding, well, this is who our customer is going to be, and this is what we're going to charge, this is what we're going to make for them, etc., etc. How on earth does IT keep up with that? And unfortunately, as competent as IT might be, competency of management and business is unfortunately a factor that we have to continually learn to deal with.
Yeah, and the complexity around budgeting, team sizes that we need, etc., the exponential changing environments in which we find ourselves really goes back to making the right decisions in what we are investing in terms of the technology platform.
Indeed, and the problem that we have is I mean, we look at basically have service and manufacturing businesses, right? And in service industries, complexity comes from variation in customer demands and needs and requirements, because you can't program for every single eventuality from the beginning. And so management becomes a slave to the loudest customer voice, which is the unhappy one, you know?
Yeah.
And in manufacturing, it's the unhappy employee who can't get that one thing done on his production line. And so how do you help management stay at, you know, ahead of these things when ultimately they always sort of spiral down to some kind of reactive loop, fixing problems, you know? And fixing problems becomes an IT issue because every problem gets handed over to IT. The IT department is a logged call or something like that. And I think it takes, what, 3 weeks for everything to become urgent. So, you know, how do we, how do we deal with that? That's the problem.
And that might not then be limited to the question of, is low code or high code the future? There might be other questions that we need to ask and answer as well. Now, with this complexity question still in mind, Charles, and we've looked at and we understand that when we look at making decisions around low code or high code and a combination of those two in our organizations, we are now faced with exponential technologies as well. And we need to ask ourselves the question, and Bruce, I'm going to ask you a similar question on the high code factor, is how can low code accommodate exponential technologies like AI, machine learning, etc.?
Sure. So I guess, you know, we're definitely picking up the theme here about it's a lot about technology, but it's often not about technology. And often when we're talking about exponential technologies, and you know, the word that's bandied around a lot in the South African market, especially at the government level at the moment, is 4IR. And I sometimes, you know, get a bit of a shiver when I hear that, because there's a lot of talk around AI and ML and IoT and, you know, and VR and all these great words. But so what? And what I mean by that is without human beings understanding what it is that we're actually trying to get out of these technologies, bringing the human perspective and the business perspective, all that we're doing is we're actually creating more drag, more debt inside the business, legacy debts, technology debt, skill set debt. So coming back to the point around how does low code help do these things? Because low code, and you know, a few of the panelists have mentioned this in different ways, because low code elevates you up to more of a business discussion, it doesn't take away from the fact that the high code underneath it is extremely powerful. And this is then, you can extend that same metaphor to plugging into exponential technologies. It allows us to free our minds up a little bit as practitioners, as product owners, as developers, from having to worry about all the building that David was talking about in the current frameworks, to actually thinking about the application of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve, and acknowledging that that is a moving point. So the point with exponentiality is that it's not about how do we use it now. It's about how do we keep things relevant and how do we keep our minds engaged in an uncertain future using these technologies that are accelerating it. Being able to use things like visual modeling, being able to get different people into a room that maybe aren't traditional technologists in terms of training and development, to be able to all sit together and think about application of these technology capabilities for new business models and new ideas is really the big key here. And then having the ability to continually evolve and change them, irrespective of what the kind of flavor of, I don't want to say flavor of the month, of how the underlying established technology infrastructures and frameworks are evolving. That's the important. And that's where I find low code is actually becoming a mindset and a metaphor for how do we bring together people in the business that weren't interacting in the past at a pace that they aren't used to, flipping bottlenecks around so that we can actually focus on what does exponentiality mean to us as a business, to us as technology practitioners, to us as a market, and really being able to think like human beings around the whole thing. So that's my viewpoint on platforms being able to bring all these things together, continually roll in whatever is going to be forward-looking or forward-capable, but really applying our minds to what it means to business. And to hugely important, and low code's the gate for that. one of the cases.
Well, interesting perspective. Bruce, what's your perspective on this if I would ask you a similar question, but from a high code perspective?
The truth is I'd actually come to a very similar conclusion. There's a nice reference that Craig has just dropped into the chat that maybe Craig can speak to in a moment. But, one of the things that we see from the research perspective, and I say this as someone deeply involved in artificial intelligence and, of course, the School for Data Science and Computational Thinking, which all interacts with some of these things that are exponentially moving, not just machine learning and artificial intelligence, also, of course, blockchain and so on. One of the things that we do, however, know is that things are moving simply so quickly that, as Charles says, we're at risk of losing a grip on what these things even mean from a business perspective. One possibility is to throw our hands up in the air and say, well, we have little hope of actually bringing that under control. But humanity is actually very far down this path, and it's in many ways a very sensible path, especially from a business perspective, that we have these things growing at such a rate. So the key then is to see how we can raise our own abstraction level and simply be better at interacting with these things at a higher level. I don't see any good reason that that many people in IT, for example, would have to ever know the deep details of machine learning or the specific APIs or some of the cloud-based infrastructure that supports that. What they really need to know about is how can I directly interact with this and what can it mean from a business perspective? What are the potential risks? How much data do I need for it? And so on. And that then right away brings us to a level where it doesn't make sense to be fiddling around in traditional programming infrastructure, because those things are already being taken care of by experts, but rather interact with it at a level that then corresponds to our business intelligence, but also the human intelligence and our comprehension of it.
Mm-hmm. Before I go to, thank you for that, Bruce. Before I go to Craig, and we really want to get a little bit more feedback on Craig's post on our group chat. David, your perspective on this, but from both sides, low code and high code, please.
Yeah, so I've been involved also in machine learning and trying to sell machine learning to the industry. And what I've really discovered is you really got to make machine learning and AI invisible, as in it's got to work. It's got to provide solutions where it actually helps people without them knowing they're using machine learning or AI. And one of the applications that I've just completed building sort of incorporates Google's as well as Amazon's APIs to do OCR and image recognition into a low-code platform. And I think it's the combination. So you can obviously build your own machine learning models and all of these things, which would be probably more of a high-code environment. So you could build it in something like R, or you could build it on Azure. But to incorporate that easily into a low-code platform like OutSystems is quite trivial. So I think the combination of machine learning and AI together with low-code, it's a natural. And I think Bruce is right in the sense that you don't really need to understand exactly how these models were built anymore. You actually just use the services that's available out there. So we're entering a very, very exciting time where all the players, Microsoft, Azure, Google, as well as Amazon, are providing these services, these machine learning services, all sorts of services, that you can actually use to your advantage in a low-code platform, and provide and actually create these very, very interesting applications. And I think, my company currently, we're currently doing that at the moment. We're leveraging off what others have built with highcode.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Charles. Your hand was up.
So one final thing that's quite interesting is we often look at disruptive technologies being outside of software development. What I mean by that is we plug into frameworks that we're speaking to. Some of the interesting stuff we're seeing in this space as well is if we want to try and keep up with the backlogs that business is demanding, with the veracity of the requirements that are coming through, we need to start acknowledging that software might need to start writing itself to an extent, or at least help us to write itself. And that's a very interesting application of machine learning, AI, and things like that that we're starting to see in the low-code space as well. I'm sure there's also applications happening in high-code. For me, that's also quite interesting, where software can help us to define what kind of software we should be building, and high quality patterns, and making sure that the engineering is up there. And then moving on to, well, this problem has been solved 8 million times from a business perspective by other businesses. Well, why don't we accelerate that and then focus on the specific exponential disruptive thing that we're trying to solve for our business? So I think that's quite interesting as well.
Thanks. Some interesting opinions out there. Craig, coming back to your post on the group chat in terms of the exponential 5, which Tony Saldana shared with us in his book, Why Digital Transformations Fail. Would you like to comment on that in line with the conversation that just took place?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Charles, I think just going back to what Charles was saying about using AI and machine learning for advancing and accelerating coding, I think that could maybe be the topic of the next webinar when we do it, because I think that's starting to become a really interesting view of the future. But as far as the exponential 5 goes, I mean, I think David actually touched on the crux of it. The crux is that with a low-code platform, you're able to orchestrate AI services or machine learning-based models that are available as a service now. You're able to orchestrate them into a journey. So Tony talks about smart process automation. There are RPA tools that are very powerful, but they have limits. And of course, that's also a low-code kind of paradigm. So now you're able to orchestrate, more AI into the customer journey, or into the service journey that you're trying to support, or into the management decision process that you're trying to support. You're able to say, okay, well, if I want to create a defensible, auditable record of something, I can use a bit of blockchain. You're able to say, if I want to use drones to do a specific function, that can all be part of the journey. So the power to me of low-code is bringing this orchestration capability of a business outcome and a business solution to bear, without having to have an army of computer scientists working from the bottom up. It's as simple as that. And I think the most important point about the exponential 5 is that they are all exploding simultaneously. So the challenge that business has is, how do you leverage and benefit from the advantages of these exponential technologies, given that they're all happening at the same time? You can't just, there's a lot of hype around AI, and AI seems to be the silver bullet at the moment, but you've got to actually think about all of these technologies in taking your business forward, to keep up with where things are going. And this is what the startups and the unicorns are doing.
Yeah, and in so doing, you need to consider then what's the right platform you are going to use, and what is the combination of the low-code, high-code platforms that should be considered in making the right long-term decisions going forward. Now, Thabo, big question for you. Are all low-code platforms the same?
No, definitely not. In fact, because low-code has become such a buzzword, because of the growth in low-code that you talked about when we started the session, it makes sense that a lot of corporations would want to gain traction from a market point of view using the term, because it's become like a buzzword in itself. So you find tools that are not really low-code, calling themselves low-code, and then you find different levels of low-code, as you'd expect. Mm-hmm. And another thing to mention is that there's something called no-code. So there is a difference between no-code and low-code. So I'd like to make that distinction as well. No-code it aims to do the same thing that low-code is doing, in that it tries to take away the complexity that you have in building solutions and get things out to production as quickly as possible. How they do it from a no-code point of view is by giving templates, so templates for doing achieving certain things, and then which is pretty fine for anything that a requirement that is meant by that template. But as soon as you need to add anything outside of the template and so forth, then you're in trouble. They generally don't support any of that type of thing because it's just really based on templates. So low code, generally what they try to do is to almost be as fast as no code in terms of accelerating what you can do. So they have accelerators that are like templates, but a bit more powerful, as well as allowing you to add any features that are not in the template and all of that type of thing. And they're not all the same because some are just maybe a development environment. So development environment that just generates code. So it's really a glorified code generator. So that's all it does. Whereas at the top end of the tools, you have ones that not only help you create the application, they also help you roll it out, as well as manage how it's used and look at analytics of how it's used, what the response is from the user base and so forth, and how you make changes, how to then, once you've rolled something out, get feedback. So others allow you to get feedback, whether it's in voice notes, annotations on the screen in a mobile application, that type of thing, that you can actually track all those change requests that come from the field, and then you can implement those back into the system and roll them out again. So they help you manage this end-to-end change that is required by your user base, right? So the very best tools do that, and then so you can now that's at the top end, and then at the bottom is just code generation, so and everything in between, right? So they're definitely not all the same.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. So we actually have reached the end of today's webinar. I would just like to give everybody an opportunity with some closing comments. But Paul, a big, huge resistance just to get your last opinion on what advice would you give the CEO on this topic?
Okay, well, I think, you need to advise him to do something that he can then measure himself against. And I think the two key sort of axes that he needs to measure against would probably be the speed at which he can get something out of IT and the flexibility that solution can give him going forward. And I think that argument lends itself to favor more of a low-code application. And certainly I think low-code can be more dynamic with management and its evolution of products and services to customers. But at the same time, he, as a management team, they need to learn how to properly utilize this vital resource that they have in their IT department. I think that's where management tends to fall down.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Craig, your last comments, please.
Cool. My final comment is nobody was paid to participate in this in this event, and we'll be putting this stuff on social and encouraging you to continue and share this further and getting feedback on what you want to talk about next to really accelerate the problem solving and art of the possible. So thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Craig. Bruce?
Well, I don't have a deep closing comments, but I really enjoyed the panel discussion. I think the takeaway for me is, there's huge value in actually learning all of these new technologies. Being stuck in traditional or high code only ways of doing things is, I think, an existential danger for anyone.
Thank you very much for that. David?
Hi, I think as a recent customer of OutSystems, what I've achieved in the last 2 months is actually remarkable, and it kind of shows you what can be done in a low-code environment with very few resources, quite a little money. I think if anyone out there really wants to get a reference, they can contact me.
Thank you for that, David. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, David. We were trying not to mention any brands, but that's cool. Thank you.
Joel?
No, so it's been a great chat, and I'm looking forward to many more. I like Craig's comment about no one was paid to be here, but that's the reality. We're all passionate about this space. I was reading a report the other day, which was quite interesting in that there was a survey done where they looked at the number of businesses that were starting to use low code or were intending to use low code shortly, and that's gone over 51% now. Now, that doesn't mean that 51% of development has been done in low code. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that this is clearly an area that at least half of the larger enterprises that this report looked at out there are really starting to take seriously. And you know, us all coming together, applying our minds, again, as technology practitioners that want to impact and change the world, and continuing these kind of conversations, I always find hugely interesting. So looking forward to more of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Tabu.
Yes, I really found this to be very informative. Like I said, you know, you understand why you are passionate about low code, specifically from your area, what problems you think it solves. It's always good to hear other people's perspectives in terms of the role that they see playing in different organizations and for different use cases. And that was definitely the case today. And I do look forward to many more conversations in this space, hopefully, in the future.
Thank you very much. I know, Paul, I asked you a specific question, but please, any final closing remarks you would like to make?
No, look, I thought this was tremendous. Thank you very much for including me in this. And I look forward to seeing where this discussion goes. I think the high code, low code debate is a really healthy one to have.
Thank you very much. I would also like to thank our audience who listened into the conversation that took place. And so do look out for the recording that we will share with you all. And just a reminder that this is a community and that we do invite you to share with us the topics you would like to discuss in future. So on behalf of myself and the panel, thank you very much for joining us and for taking the time to participate. So my name is still Liesel van Rooyen, and have a wonderful day further. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. If there's anyone on the call that wants to say any final words, you're welcome to put your hand up. But otherwise, thanks a lot, and we're going to do these regularly in future. Try and keep it to something that really adds value to your business. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Anybody
Liesel.
on the panel?
Thanks for adjudicating as well.
Yeah, thanks, Liesel.
Well,
Pleasure. It doesn't look like is there anybody who would like to make a comment? Trainer?
It looks like we're all good.
Yep.
Nobody's putting their hand up.
Happy to add something.
Sure, who's that?
That's Rainer.
Hey, Ray, go for it. Go for it, Ray. We've been waiting for you all session.
Yeah, I can be timid at times, as you know, Craig. But yeah, I just wanted to add, I've had the honor of working with some of you over the last few weeks, and I think that coming from a digital marketing perspective, where we're using more and more low-code tools to deliver, you know, your more commonplace, you know, small business, you know, web-based environment systems, it's really been a massive help for us to deliver our projects a lot quicker, and also bring our costs down relative to the time to value and resource that it takes to build these things. And that I think the new generation that's coming into the workplace are going to gravitate a lot towards this this new way of doing things. And while it's still probably a hot debate across the development world, I think for business leaders and business-focused people, as well as the new generation that are looking for tools that they can rapidly deploy themselves into this environment that they want to get into, and there's not so much of a hurdle anymore for them to do that. I think it just lends itself to a promising environment for the future of development and digital transformation. Whereas I always personally found the coding world to be very, very overwhelming. And when we found low-code tools that we could use, it changed the game completely for us. So I'm pretty much an advocate for it, but it was good to hear today that there's still a balance in the markets, and that there's a place for everything.
Awesome.
So yeah, thanks for your contribution. Thanks for doing this, and I think it would be great to definitely expand this conversation into bigger forums.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks,
All
Ray.
the best.
All the
Thanks.
best.
Thanks so much.
I'm going to
Cheers,
stop
Bye.
recording. Thank